This is Managing with Logic, a Bayesian causal network assessment of forest management in the Monarch Reserve using the critical list. This slide presents an overview of the entire project, in which I applied Bayesian logic models, or Bayesian causal networks, to determining the variables of impact, individual impact, and conditionality on forest management in the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve in Mexico. The reason for this approach is that it is a very complex multivariate scenario in which higher order variance had the potential to be extremely useful in telling us the interactions between and among the theoretically established and empirically established variables in the critical list of variables for sustaining the commons. That was synthesized by Arun Agarwal in 2003 after decades of work by Eleanor Ostrom, Robert Wade, and Balland and Plateau. Four settlements were chosen to participate, one based on willingness to participate, and two based on accessibility, which includes sort of safety and willingness to participate, as well as the fact that they all had demonstrated efficient forest management, and that was sort of the control for this study. 2 indigenous communities and 2 ejidos were chosen. The reason for the distinction is that indigenous communities and ejidos have slightly different land tenure features according to the Mexican government and the rights that they are permitted. So those were also chosen as a very brief initial comparison to see if there was any immediate difference between the land tenure type as well as the variable interactions. The data collection was based on survey instruments, literature review, and physical and demographic information. A forest cover analysis was conducted to determine whether or not forest cover had been maintained within an established threshold over the time period that we were looking at. And the statistical analysis was the Bayesian causal network and the higher order variance that those provide. These tables are just to sort of demonstrate how it was possible to convert qualitative data into quantitative data for comparative purposes using the Bayesian causal network software, Netica. So I used normalized percentages based on relative measures or frequency of occurrence. This is, of course, in great detail in the publication on the subject. And then that's on the left. And on the right, you can see the variable table that's actually more concise in the paper, in which the individual impact variables and the conditional influence variables are highlighted to demonstrate which variables were individually impactful and which ones were conditionally influenced. Here we see the results from the forest cover mapping comparing 2 periods in the decade between 2006 and 2015. The criteria for determining which images would be used for mapping is described in the paper in detail. And dense forest cover was not only maintained, but increased in the reserve area from 2006 to 2015, which is a rare overview of total forest cover maintenance inside and outside the core zone, buffer zone, and even outside the reserve in one particular case, in the case of San Francisco Curungale. The single most influential variable was matching harvest restrictions to recuperation or recovery. And when combined with the other influential variables, it resulted in significant conditionality, of course. The most impactful conditional variable was resource system characteristics, well-defined boundaries overall, and this was consistent for all of the settlements that were studied. This was followed closely by resource characteristics small size. So small size of resource base and well-defined boundaries of the community and resource area. The sensitivity analysis clearly indicated the individual variables with the greatest influence, which were labeled as D in that previous sensitivity analysis table, and conditional influence C. And it was interesting to note that both well-defined boundaries and small size were conditionally influential, both in the resource systems characteristics group and the group characteristic categories. Keeping in mind that this is all based on the critical list of variables for sustaining the commons, of which there's a full replica in the publication on the subject that was published in December of last year. Small size and well-defined boundaries were shared by all settlements. And most interesting is that for all but one, San Francisco Corungeo, small size and well-defined boundaries were shared in both the resource characteristics group as well as the group characteristics category. So to recap, the conclusions are that overall, some of the critical variables for sustaining the commons were more influential than others, particularly in conditional dependency. Full compliance with the criteria established, theoretical criteria for the critical list of variables for sustaining the commons was not necessary for efficient forest cover maintenance. A larger sample would be needed to ascertain the influence of land tenure type. 4 clearly was not enough. And the agreement improved by opening dialogue between local and central managers was helpful in the ultimate outcome of the study. And it also provided a voice for local managers in having a participatory role in rural establishment, which is currently lacking. In terms of the practical applications, this process streamlines the process of case study analysis and will be applied to as many settlements as possible in the future. A larger study is underway. This approach, using the critical list of variables for sustaining the commons, facilitates a meta-analysis over time so that comparability based on theoretical context of the variables results in sort of a larger consistency across case studies, and thus scales up very nicely. This kind of assessment also provides a sort of convenient monitoring tool because it can be updated very easily with new information as it becomes available. And it provides a baseline for the 20th century. One could argue it also provides a systematic approach with broad applicability in terms of operationalization, which there is a paper under review on that topic. And agreement provided by opening dialogue between local and central managers. This helps give a voice to the local managers that is helpful in devising and informing policy and strategies. I am open to any questions and communications you may have after viewing this information, and I'm happy to connect with any of you who are interested. Thank you so much for your time.